Illinois state lawmakers got some questions answered today. An Auditor General's report found the Illinois Department of Public Health did not identify and respond adequately to the November of 2020 LaSalle Veterans Home COVID-19 outbreak. The audit found IDPH officials did not offer advice or assistance on how to slow the spread at the home, offer additional rapid COVID-19 tests, and they were unsure about the availability of antibody treatments. The head of the State Department of Veterans Affairs says changes have now been made to ensure something like this doesn't happen in the future.
One of the most important things when I arrived was to make sure that those lines of communication were open. I have a direct line to Governor Pritzker if I need to call the governor for something. I have regular conversations with the IDPH director.
He also says his senior home administrator has go teams to go to veterans' homes within 24 hours to help provide oversight. Prince was not the director during the 2020 outbreak.